Hello, everyone. My name is Per Bühlmann. I'm the director of NRC Flüchtlingshilfe in Germany, one of the partners to the Human Rights Film Festival in Berlin. And I'm sitting here with Afsaneh Salari, who is the producer of the film The Forbidden Strings. And a short introduction about Afsaneh. She was born in Iran, and she holds an BA in editing from the Art University of Tehran, a master in creative directing from the Université Paris 8 in France. And after that, she continued her education further in documentary directing with Doc Nomad's joint masters from Universidade Lusofona in Portugal, the RZFE in Hungary, and the Lucas School of Arts in Belgium. And she's also the co-founder of the Doc Maniacs Collective in Tehran, and now works as a documentary director and producer both in Iran and France. Welcome, Afsaneh.
Thank you so much, Per, for this interview.
We've seen a film now. It's about young people who grew up in Iran, whose parents are from Afghanistan, and they formed a band. How did you get to know the protagonist of the film, and how did the idea for the film come about?
So basically, the director of the film, Hasan Noori, he is also a second generation of refugees in Iran, the same as the protagonist that you've just seen in the film. And when I co-founded the Maniacs Collective in Iran, our initial idea was to accompany filmmakers from Iran and Afghanistan, or like the region, with a more with a bigger wish, to international circles. So Hassan was one of the first people I met when I was actually looking for ideas to produce a film. And he had also this idea since some time before, because he was a good teenager friend of the protagonists you see in the film, Akbar, Hakim, and Mohammad. He knew them, and he was looking for a way to be able to produce this film. It was also my first producing work, and I was already working in the community of Afghan people, and the idea simply touched me so much. And I knew that by producing this film, I'm putting some light on an issue which is very unspoken in Iran. And I'm doing it with a filmmaker who's also originally coming from the same background as his protagonist. So he is the one who somehow owns this story as well.
And would you say that the experience of the protagonist here, that in a way reflect the situation of the whole generation? Is it a story being told through music in a way? And or would you say there's a typical conflict here also between parents and parental values and the children's desire to live their own lives? I mean, we hear the story about, when will you be living a proper life? I mean, isn't that what parents always tell their teachers when they become artists?
I think, yeah, and it's also somehow a bit exclusive to Afghan immigrants who live in Iran. The first generation and second generation, they do have this clash, because for the first generation of refugees, it's important to have a ceiling, to have a safe environment, to work, to make a proper life. And that's why they moved to Iran at first place when they were fleeing war in Afghanistan in 1980s, right? So they want the second generation to also somehow follow this path, to create a proper life, to create a family, to work, and to just be content with what you have, right? And the idea of wanting to create a band, make music, and then going back to Afghanistan to perform, a country we fled from, of course, is not very digestible for the families.
Well, you see also, it's as you were mentioning, it's very important for the band to play in Afghanistan. And I mean, some of them haven't even been in Afghanistan. And what role does the music play for the connection of this band to Afghanistan? Are they kind of living out their dream about a home country through the music, or does the music have a more central function? What would you say?
I think it's both. I think when they started creating their band, probably like 3-4 years before we start shooting the film, it was this dream of being artists and this dream of wanting to follow something that you're not necessarily supposed to follow. You're a laborer, but still you have something that is boiling in your heart and you want to follow that passion. But then very soon, because they come from a background and they come from a society in Iran, a community in Iran, which is very discriminated, they somehow use music to voice out this oppression they've been living on for years since birth in this host country. and also the nostalgia for a country that you feel you're connected to, and you're connected to, and you belong to that country because you feel you will be more welcome there because you're not welcome in Iran. So I think they had many reasons to want to somehow use all these like poems that they write, like I mean, to compose things that connect them to Afghanistan, and also somehow nourish this dream of wanting to go back to that homeland in the heart of Afghanistan, in Bamiyan, to expose themselves and to somehow reconnect to something they've always been deprived from.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, the sense of belonging, but also the oppression, because there are some very powerful lyrics in the songs. And I mean, if you go to the music, the soundtrack to the film also is very beautiful. I mean, it's an original soundtrack, and it uses a combination of Western instruments such as the violins and a cello, and traditional Afghan instruments such as the dambura, which I understand is very typical also for Bamiyan and the Hazara tradition. I mean, could you tell me a bit more about the soundtrack, how it interacts with the rock music and the thoughts when creating the whole composition together?
So the composer of the film, I would like to mention his name, Afshin Azizi. He's a very young, talented, like rising composer in Iran. We were very happy to work with him, and from the beginning, it was very clear to him that for the time that our protagonists are still in Iran, we do not necessarily want strong soundtrack because also in terms of information, there's a lot of things that have to be passed on to the audience. But as soon as they like somehow start this dream journey and things are away, all the obstacles are away, and they are on the road to Afghanistan, then we are also somehow on this road sensation with our protagonist, and we want this to like build up little by little until the actual scene in the concert. So he used, as you said, like more generic, let's say, Western instruments for the parts that are in Iran, but because Afghanistan remains like a dreamland, it's like far away that they are going to little by little discover it. Then he added like these touches of Afghan instruments.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned the concert also, because you can see how people stand up and they're being, forced to sit down again. But how was the reception in general? Again, we talked about it being a very traditional area, and here comes a band of basically people who left Afghanistan and now coming back. They see a new country, they play music which probably isn't that well known. How was it received as a whole when they came to Bamiyan?
They were actually very well received once in Bamiyan because, anyway, people in Bamiyan, they are very used to this festival. It's an annual festival where there's music, dance, performance, a lot of things happen during that time of the year. So people from the city of Bamiyan and the villages around, they're used to going to that festival and they know that things happen. But it's always been very traditional music, never rock music, never nothing of non-Afghan music, right? So that already was, I think, very curious for people to discover. But the other part of that is the band itself. As I mentioned before, it's not a professional band, of course, but they have some sort of presence on social media, and people know them somehow in Afghanistan. They're coming from Iran, so they were very curious to see who they actually are. And the female protagonist of the film, Suri, is very well known on social media, on Instagram. She's an Instagram influencer, and she has a lot of followers in Afghanistan. So I think that also contributed a lot to see a woman coming on this stage to sing, used to rock music.
But it's also a very impressive setting you have when you see the camera comes up from behind the scene and you see people sitting, you see the band from behind, and you see the mountain range with the missing Buddha statues in there. Was this that you did this on purpose to really show the band against the backdrop of the Afghan conflict and tragedy, or what were your thoughts about this?
Yes, I mean, the place of the concert has already been very symbolic for the director himself because he wanted this band to perform this concert in front of those Buddhas who tell a lot about the history of that country, about all the bloodshed in that country, and about everything those people have gone through. And those Buddhas stand for that, right? So, and in a way, we see throughout the film that to reach to that stage, they also have to pass through a road which is called, in Afghanistan, it's called the Road of Death. Jalris is road of death. It's a road that you have to pass by Taliban. The whole Bamiyan is free of Taliban, but all the surroundings and the roads that end to Bamiyan are somehow controlled by Taliban checkpoints. So they have somehow freed themselves from the control of Taliban to reach into that space. And you see Buddhas, the ones who've been ruined by Taliban as well. It's as if, it shows about the scar which still remains in this land. We are there, we are performing this music. Our dream is somehow come true, but you see there are still scars, and we are singing our pain in front of this scar. So I think it was very symbolic, but the whole thing somehow came together. Part of it was planned by the director, part of it was because the festival happens there, and the other part was that we didn't know that they have to pass through that road, right? So I think eventually it created a very symbolic scene that brings all these meanings together.
And exactly the road of death, I was going to come to that. I mean, we clearly see the fears of the musicians on the road going through Jalris, and how relieved they were when they got through. But how did the film team feel? How were you even able to film during the trip? Didn't you feel fear for your safety as well?
Of course, the whole team was very concerned. I wasn't there, and I didn't know as a producer that actually my director has decided to shoot this scene. They told me once the journey was over, because I would have disagreed. I would say, like, this is a big risk. We don't want to put our protagonist in danger. We don't want to put our cameraman and sound person in danger. So that's why they didn't tell me. And in the car, we have only the director who's sitting in front, and we have the camera person, our very courageous, brave camera person who's done also other films in Afghanistan, but I've heard that he's been the one pushing also for that scene, who filmed with his iPhone, because if there was a camera, it could also somehow multiply the risk of being caught by Taliban. So yeah, I didn't know, and they did it, and I think they've done a very good job. But I would be more careful next time when I produce a film in Afghanistan, and yeah, be more careful for the safety of my team.
I believe you. And of course, the question we're all asking after seeing is, how did they get back to Iran? Again, through Jalris?
No, 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 no. They took a plane, so they stayed in Bamiyan as long as they could. How do you say that? They could, yeah, buy flight tickets so that everything is safe.
You say how things are developing even now. What happened to the band after the film ends? When you see the final pictures, what has happened in the time after that? Does the band still exist? Do they play?
No, they don't. No, 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 they don't. We were very hopeful that if the film is released like soon, they can somehow continue. They can not continue. They can actually receive some exposure, because you know that in Afghanistan, even if they had this concert and even if there was this crowd who came, they didn't receive any exposure. They didn't receive any offer from anyone. It was just like a one-time concert. They could not necessarily do any concert in Iran. Akbar left, as he's now in Germany seeking asylum. He's an asylum seeker. Suri is now doing completely different things. She's into fashion design, and happily she receives a lot of support from her family. So I think she's very successful in what she's doing and in what she's involved. And our two other protagonists, as they say in the film, they have to somehow bear with the financial circumstances they're stuck in. And the situation in Iran, financially, because of this recent sanctions, again, is very, very difficult now. I mean, all the categories of the society are touched, but Afghan refugees are even more touched. So to pursue such dream has become even more and more difficult for them. So no, the band is not playing right now.
And you mentioned before also that the reception in Iran was like, can this really happen? Are Afghans, is this what can happen in a migrant community? But would you say that your main target group were Iranians in Iran, or were you already from the beginning looking at a broader audience, because this is really a story, as you say, about minorities or migrants in general?
Both, yeah. Our target audience were both Iranian themselves, because there's a very, very limited, like, closed view on this community, which is around 2 million people in Iran. and people like describe Afghans through only cliches, and there's always this cliche of Afghans being just like manual laborers doing nothing, not going to university, whereas this second generation is actually a very bright generation. They go to university, they have a lot of achievements, they do art, they do music, they become filmmakers like Hasan himself. But I think that exists also everywhere in the world where there's this second uh, citizens, where there are like minorities, no matter they're immigrants or not, we always have these prejudices around them. And I think that's the universal message of this film, that I think that's the impressive part of it, but also for the minorities themselves as well. I think that's important, that it's not just for the host countries, for the host people to see this, but also the immigrants or for the minorities themselves, that no matter there's obstacles like Taliban on the road, where you're going to the most dangerous country in the world to perform a concert, you can. I mean, they did and they could. So, yeah, we somehow decided to target both. And I think the film somehow achieved in having that universal language.
You can. And I think that's a very powerful message of empowerment to send. And in my opinion, I think the film really, really succeeds in this. Afsaneh, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been a pleasure also watching the film. Thank you very much for this discussion. And I hope to be able to follow new trips with you or with the band or with things that you're involved in and how we can see in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Per, for giving me the opportunity to express my thoughts and also the thoughts of my director around this film. And I really hope that this film continues this journey, no matter the situation we are in order to create meaningful dialogue as we had just now. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching us.